So I'm okay. Hello, everyone. So today our guest is Dr. Frank Emmert. He is a tenured professor at Indiana University School of Law, Robert McKinney School of Law. He's also the director of its Center of International and Comparative Law, and he teaches international business transaction. He also teaches international commercial arbitration, world trade law, and international law and EU. So we are very honored to have him, and he's going to talk to us about how you can become an international lawyer. So he's going to guide you and help you with. And if you have any questions, what you can do is you can write down your questions in the comment section, and I can take your question and we can answer them. So thank you very much for joining us today. And so I want to start with asking. So how did you start the Center for International and Comparative Law, and why international law has been something that you have been passionate about?
Yeah, well, first of all, welcome to all those who are listening and joining us here. And I would encourage you to send in your questions and comments, and I will try to answer them as much as I can. Maybe a few words about my own background. I'm originally from Germany. I'm a German-trained lawyer. I got the judge's qualification in Germany. And then I went for an LL.M, a master's degree, to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, because I wanted to have the dual qualification of the continental European legal systems, the civilian tradition, but also the common law as applied in the United States. And this really was an eye-opening experience. I understood that you cannot be an international lawyer if you are trained in only one legal system. International law is really about parties interacting from different countries, different jurisdictions, right? Different legal systems. They're doing business together or negotiating international conventions, all kinds of contracts, dispute settlement, whatever comes the way. And if you are not able to understand the way the other side is thinking, what they are saying, you know, we use similar words, but maybe we don't mean exactly the same things. You are not going to be the best possible lawyer for that purpose, right? So I felt really that this was, for me, a transforming experience to have that opportunity. I went back to Europe for a while. I worked in Italy. I worked in Switzerland. I was actually dean of a law school in Eastern Europe for a couple of years. When the transformation there started. And all of these experiences, of course, helped me understand more, you know, how different legal systems approach the same problems. As lawyers, our job is to be the best possible problem solvers for our clients, right? For whoever is our client, it could be a government. If you're working for the Foreign Service or for the Ministry of Justice, it could be an international organization like the UN, or the WTO, or any one of those. And of course, in most cases, it will be a private client, a corporate entity, or even a natural person. And they want us to find solutions. And the more we know, the more we understand, the more we have this kind of a global picture, the more creative and the more focused our work can really be on finding ways of solving these problems that maybe another lawyer who does not have this kind of background cannot find, right? Because they haven't been exposed. So when I came to the United States later again, after having worked in a number of different countries, I was offered a position, a tenured position at Indiana University, and I had not really heard very much about this law school before, I must confess. Had never been in Indianapolis, and so I thought a little bit, you know, okay, they need somebody who does the international work, right? And maybe a bit arrogant and stupid on my behalf. And so, yeah, they said, we want you to come here and create this Center for International Comparative Law. And I thought I was going to be more or less the only person. But to my surprise and great pleasure, really, I found that a lot of people were doing already international and comparative work at the faculty here. And what they were looking for more was somebody to coordinate this a bit, to pull it all together, fill a few gaps that were still there. And we have now certainly one of the most international programs in the Midwestern United States amongst the public universities in the United States with more moderate fees. And when I look around the faculty here, I'm always happy to see that more than half of my colleagues are doing international and comparative work. They teach abroad or they have research projects with international entities and foreign universities. They come and bring us, international guests and so on. So we are offering really a very international education without getting, the big name credit like, a school like Georgetown or Harvard or Yale or Stanford might get. But it's fun, it's nice to be here. The city is very pleasant. I recommend this place to live because the cost of living is much lower than a place like New York City or Boston or, the whole region around San Francisco and Stanford and so on.
So I've lived in Indianapolis as well, and I would say that there are a lot of headquarters of organizations, corporations that are based out of Midwest and in Indianapolis. So in terms of getting the exposure and getting your feet wet, if you're studying law at Indiana University, there are a lot of opportunities, and the faculty and the professors are very helpful. So as you were talking about, I want to ask you a question about what kind of clients does international lawyer have. But before I ask that, I'll go back to the script and I'll ask, what does an international business lawyer do? So for all of the students who are watching, and we are getting some nice comments from Lisa, she's saying, so good, you chose to talk about this topic. Then we have a student from our YouTube channel who's from Uganda. So if all those people watching, what would you tell them? What does an international lawyer do, and how should they build their career towards that?
Yeah, I think it may be helpful to categorize what lawyers do and where do lawyers meet international law, right? Where do we as lawyers encounter international law in our practice, in our work? And I think you can roughly divide the profession into 5 branches, if you will. And that's the first branch would be the big corporate lawyers, right? Who work for a law firm, and it's one of these larger firms that have multiple offices. In America, these firms often have hundreds, maybe thousands of attorneys, partners. In other countries, they are a bit smaller, but they do very similar work. They work with large corporations. Almost all of their transactions, all of their work has to do with international clients. They are really almost dominating this field of the larger transactions where many millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars are at stake. For a firm, I've seen it many times, they advertise these kind of positions when they're recruiting. They will not even consider someone unless they have an international education. Right. I myself am from Germany. In Germany, I went to what was back then maybe the best law school in Munich. And I thought, yeah, this is the apex, better than German law, very organized, very systematic. It doesn't get. Ever since I have been working in other countries, I've seen that they're not stupid either. They do things in good ways here and maybe in other ways that are also interesting there. Sometimes we have good examples. Sometimes we have examples how not to do things, but you can only learn, right? And that's exactly what a big law firm wants. They want someone who has already that perspective, who has already compared, who is a bit critical of their own legal system, who understands that some things are done differently, sometimes better in other countries, and who can flexibly move through these different markets. Maybe another word here in this context, English is of course the language, right? I had to learn it, was not my first language. You have an advantage in Pakistan that English is basically an official language base, and therefore you have very good English skills. Capitalize on that, make use of that, because the language of international law is English, right? There's just no doubt about it. Yeah, I have spoken with many practitioners. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. I do international arbitrations. When I meet arbitrators from countries who are not native English speakers, they often say, well, that's one of the most important things that we recommend to our children, our students, and so on. Learn English on the professional level. Right. So we have the big corporate law firms, and then we have the small law firms. These are more like general practitioners, and they do everything. And for them, international law is not going to be the only meal ticket. They cannot make a living only doing international law. They will have to do different things. Sometimes it's family law. Sometimes maybe, they have to take a traffic accident. But of course, to the extent they have, people coming to them, maybe a family issue, but it turns out that the family has property abroad, or that a family member got married or divorced in a foreign country. So suddenly these elements of international law also come into play. Right? So it's not every day. They don't act maybe for multinational corporations, more it's smaller, medium-sized businesses, private individuals, immigration law issues, for example, international family law, international inheritance law, maybe a bit of international tax law. That's actually maybe the most difficult practice, right? Because you have to know a lot of things. Each time you have to quickly get up to speed with a new problem, because you don't want to send these clients away. You don't want to say, oh, you know what, I can't do that. Maybe you need somebody else. That's the second category. Then we have, of course, the parallel in the corporate world. We have in-house counsel in large corporations, and they do pretty much the same as a lawyer in a big law firm, except that the large corporations will outsource the work when large amounts are at stake. And that's for liability reasons, because if the in-house lawyer makes a mistake, then the company has to pocket it. Whereas if the law firm makes a mistake, they are liable for whatever happens, right? So they'll be very careful to do the right things for this corporate client. And if you are an in-house counsel for a smaller company, again, you are a bit of a wizard of all these different trades, because today you have to oversee a contract where they're just sourcing some spare parts, but tomorrow you have to do a licensing agreement because they have to pay patent licensing fees for whatever they're producing and so on, right? So these two categories you can really keep, like big law firm and large multinational in-house, and then small law firm or medium-sized enterprise with their own lawyer. The next category is government, right? And in government, again, there are differences, because if you're working for the Ministry of Justice in the Department of International Law, you're going to oversee the contract, the conventions that are being negotiated. You are looking, maybe advising the parliament when they are reviewing to ratify an international convention. Maybe you are working with the Foreign Service and you have to learn a lot of public international law, how to represent the country, on the diplomatic level, maybe overseeing a speech that the ambassador might give in a foreign country where there are some legal questions being addressed. These things often cross the desk of a lawyer before an ambassador who may not be a lawyer, him or herself, would actually deliver the speech. If you are working for a larger city, Lahore, or a region in your country, you will also encounter international law, because sometimes they all have to implement international conventions. Maybe the way they are transformed in the country nowadays, we have conventions on labor law, human rights, international environmental law, many others. But you're not going to do that every day, right? But on different levels of government, you're going to meet different types of international law. And that's just a very fascinating and interesting thing. Switching from government, you can actually, of course, work for the international organizations, right? If you are interested in living abroad, for example, you could work for the United Nations. They have offices not only in New York, they're also in Geneva. They have branches in other parts of the world. The World Trade Organization, and then there are many, many others. governmental organizations, but they're not the only ones. There's also then a whole army of what we call NGOs, non-governmental organizations. You may end up working for Oxfam in the United Kingdom. You may work for Amnesty International in one of their offices, right? There are many of these organizations. They do law and development work. They promote rule of law in countries that are maybe less developed, helping with, court reforms, institutional reforms. And of course, there are also for-profit entities in this, consulting firms that work with governments, for example, when they are looking at ratifying the WTO agreement, or a free trade agreement. And they need this kind of education training for their officials, advice for the government how to negotiate a good deal. So that's an important area of international law as well. And finally, the fifth branch basically is academia. Right? You could become a professor. Right? And the nice thing about being a professor, certainly in my kind of position, is you can combine practice with teaching. I find that very important because I bring the practical experience back to the classroom, right? My students, they often get cases where I just change a bit the names, right? Because as an arbitrator, I have confidentiality requirements, of course, but I will make it enough different so that it's not recognizable. But for the students, they also realize this is real, right? This is not just some textbook case, some fairy tale, something that doesn't actually happen in the real world, but they understand that, we're talking at real industries, we're talking about real kind of contracts, even if they are sufficiently abstracted to protect the confidentiality of the actual clients. And that enriches the teaching, and sometimes I have the opportunity even, to use students as co-consultants. They are working as assistants for me when I'm doing a larger case. And of course, it's fascinating, right? I also do moot court competitions. You may have heard of the this moot court in international commercial arbitration. They have a competition run out of Vienna with a branch in Hong Kong. So I'm an arbitrator there. I've been doing that for many years. I go sometimes with a student team. I'm not coaching them. Normally, I have other people who do that. I want to have, clear lines of separation, because as an arbitrator, you get certain information that the student teams, they have to work for that, right? They shouldn't get it from their coaches and their professors. But it allows me to be, basically walking on both sides of this divide and basically overcoming the divide by really bringing the teaching to the classroom up to date and practice oriented, but at the same time also being able to work as a consultant. I've worked with governments, I worked with international corporations, I'm sometimes appointed as an arbitrator, and that's very nice, right? So in this field of international law, what matters, I had this experience many times. I go into a law firm in Brussels or in New York or in London, and I'm surprised by the internationality of the team, right? Every single time I find, wow, this really, it's all about qualifications. It doesn't matter what kind of a passport you're holding or what the color of your skin is or your religion or anything like that. They just want the best people. They don't care where you come from, right? They will make your visa and work permits happen if you have the qualifications. So there are really good opportunities there for the people who are passionate and who go and take the right steps to qualify themselves.
So I think one of the first tips that I think I would want to talk about is their international education. Like you were talking about, that it was really helpful in your career to get knowledge from different common law jurisdictions. And so like in our context, a lot of our students, they study UK law very extensively in their LLB honors degree. So if they want to become international lawyers, they should try to go to a country where they can get knowledge of another country's another country's legal system and their legal precedents. So they have more exposure. And I think with the US, if they're doing their LLM from the US, one opportunity that they get is they not only get exposure to a legal system that is very robust and has an international element to it, but there is a lot of corporations that are based out of the US. And what I was gathering from your talk is that it's mostly working with a corporate or as a corporate lawyer or working as an in-house counsel. So, and also with governments and academia as well. So if they want to become international lawyers, they should have more on their resume. They should have more exposure to different jurisdiction. Then they can be on their path to become international lawyers.
Yeah, I think you just have to look at the numbers, where are the jobs? So for example, when the United Nations in New York, they're hiring lawyers, they will hire a handful of people, and they have a mandate. They have to bring in people from diverse jurisdictions from all the member states. There has to be a representative. So for example, if an American citizen is applying there, they may be very well qualified, but there are already too many Americans, right? So they may not get the job. The job may go to a Pakistani lawyer who is similarly qualified, maybe not quite as experienced, simply because they're underrepresented still in an organization. But it's only a handful of jobs, right? The real jobs are in the private sector. And that's where most of us will end up, right? I practiced in the private sector. I still do it as part-time. And most of the people who are going to listen to us today and maybe in the coming days and weeks will find it easier to work in the private sector, right? Even in government, there are not that many positions. In academia, it's quite limited, simply numerically, right? And if you want to do government work, you have to be passionate about it, because you're also often taking a pay cut. Government work is not as well paid. You may have more regular hours. Maybe you get to see the family more and you go home earlier every day. But it comes at a price, right? If you are a high-profile attorney in the corporate world, you will make more money. You will have different responsibilities. Not for everyone, right? Some people want to have a bit more of a balanced pace, where they can make room in their schedule also for family and hobbies and so on. Others, certainly at the beginning, the first couple of years of their career, they're willing to work very hard and long hours to put their mark, right, and get hired for these kind of corporate jobs. But it is what it is. You work harder, you work longer, and you get paid more. You have to be realistic about that.
So we often in our live sessions, we always have this question that pops up again and again. I think students are trying to get a full grasp of the picture, and so a lot of students, they decide to do their LLM. A lot of students decide to do their bar at law degree. So and they normally see it as one or the other, because there's a substantial investment that comes with doing either an LLM or doing a bar at law degree from the UK. So, so the question is coming from Muhammad Hamza Rahman, and he was saying, is it necessary to have a LLM degree or bar at law to work for United Nations and to become part of it?
Yeah, I think you can all answer that question yourselves, because you just look at the hiring there, right? When they advertise a position in a place like New York, obviously there's going to be quite some interest, right? People from around the world are going to apply for it. Now, to some extent, they will have to look a little bit at diverse membership, right? You don't want people only from common law jurisdictions or European countries, so you have to hire from diverse backgrounds. But of course, from within those different groups, they want the best people, right? And who are the best people? The best people are those that have shown in their education and in their practice that they are giving it their everything, right? That they are not just trying to get an easy ride, or, they are not conceited that they say, okay, I have an LLB with honors and that should be enough. If the next person already has an LLM or is a member of the UK bar or has some other special qualifications, just think about it. All else being equal, who are they going to hire, right? So I always advise, be the best person that you can be. Do whatever it takes, right? And if you are passionate to get a job like that, look a little bit, what are they advertising, right? What are the requirements? And then, for example, you can visit, right? They have internships. They have also, even just as a tourist, you can visit, you can talk to some people, right? You can get in touch. There are organizations, there are Facebook pages for the young professionals in the UN system and so on. You can share your views and ask questions and find out what did other people have as qualifications when they got hired and so on. So basically, what do I need in order to get hired? And I always advise, don't draw your circles too narrowly, because if your goal is to work for the UN and that's the only thing that will satisfy you, that may be very hard. Some years they don't hire, because they have budget cuts, whatever, and then the competition may be very, very tough. That's why I advocate, law is a very flexible thing to do. You can work in-house, you can work in government, you can work in the private sector, you can teach, and so there are many options. But international law opens all of those doors, right? Yes, you can work for the UN, but if that for some reason doesn't pan out, well, then try something else. Work for an NGO or work in your own government or work in the private sector, because the qualification is there and you can do all of that. You will have to refocus maybe a bit, right? As a UN lawyer or in the foreign service in your own country, you will do more public international law. The corporate sector, they need more commercial law. They need more arbitration and so on. But once you understand the basics, the rest is all within reach. You can quickly shift your focus in order to respond to the labor market. When I studied, I went for public international. We had an excellent center. My professor there later became the German judge on the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So it was something that was very interesting, very good opportunity in Munich at the time. But of course, the labor market was different, and my interest shifted. Then European Union law became very interesting. I did that for many years, and I'm still doing it to some level. But then when I moved to Eastern Europe, they needed a different set of skills again. They were preparing for EU membership, but they also ratifying a lot of international conventions and negotiating international business transactions for the first time. So I developed more and more in that direction. And when I came to the United States, European Union law was not anymore my focus. But these are all gradual steps. And if you have a solid foundation, you can build different careers on that, not only one narrow focus. I think it's pretty safe to say the only thing that's going to be constant in your lives is change. And none of you, and I would almost wager to that, none of you will do the same kind of work from the beginning to the end of your careers, right? You have to be able to be flexible, right? Look at Brexit, right? The United Kingdom exit from the European Union will hurt the United Kingdom in ways that they haven't even begun to understand. For example, it'll reduce the impact of the significance of English law in international transactions. Fewer people will do it. It'll reduce the opportunities, for example, arbitration in London at the London Court of International Arbitration. It'll still happen, of course, but it's going to be less appealing, right? If you're not part of there's a lot of companies are moving their headquarters out of the United Kingdom to the Netherlands, to France, to Germany, to other countries on the continent, because they need to be sure that they have duty-free access, but more important, that there are no regulatory barriers. We talk about non-tariff barriers. They come from different product rules, standards for packaging, labeling, safety, health, and so on, protection. If the United Kingdom wants to be a sovereign country and have different rules from the European Union, they're making it very hard for their companies to work on the EU markets, right? Because the EU has one set of rules and the UK is going to have a different set of rules. And then you have to package, label, produce your products in different ways to make them fit in both of these markets. And that's not going to be easy, right? And the biggest impact will be that the United Kingdom is no longer at the tables in Brussels. They're not part of the legislative procedure anymore. They cannot make sure that their companies, don't have to do major changes, don't have to worry about compatibilities and so on. The laws will be made in the European Union, and the UK has two choices. Either comply without being at the table, or run a different course and then imposing these kind of consequences on their businesses. And so if I was a young lawyer in a country like Pakistan or even in Uganda, or where we have other people, yes, it helps to be knowledgeable in English law, but the importance of English law was never that great, and it's going to further decline now. The English have just shot themselves in the foot and asked for a machine gun to do it more effectively. And my prediction is, you can quote me on that if you want, in 10 years they will crawl back and ask for readmission to the European Union, because by that time they will have tasted the economic impact. And the younger generation in the UK that were too lazy to go to the vote when Brexit came about, right? They will have learned that if they want to be in the UK and not going somewhere else, they need to be in the European Union, because the world is bigger, right? It's not an island that can do everything it wants on its own. It's just a fact of life.
I would also like to add to Muhammad Hamza Rahman's question that building on your input, where you said that if you want to be an international lawyer, you need to know about different nations and their jurisdiction and their legal systems. So if you have done your LLB honors from University of London, then it's a good idea to do your LLM from the US or another country, so you can get a exposure and knowledge of both different jurisdictions. And like you said, the role of English law will decline, what students can do is they can also get a taste of some civil law countries, like, so if they want to if they want to work in the EU, so that can be another way you can look at it. So if you're thinking of becoming an international lawyer, LLM seems to be like a better option than doing a bar at law, because in your bar at law, you'll be trained in English legal procedure. You'll not be trained with in corporate law or arbitration and all other aspects. So coming back to our discussion, you talked about the importance of how you can become an international lawyer. I want you to share your input or your insights about international arbitration. What is international arbitration, and how does it fit in a lawyer's journey who wants to become an international lawyer?
Yeah, let me say one more word about the different legal systems before we move to the dispute settlement side. As a lawyer, maybe I should have clarified earlier, if you're in commercial law, or business law, which is really what I do mostly now, or in trade law, there's the transactional side, right? That's where you design contracts and you look for opportunities with your clients to source products or services or sell them in other jurisdictions. And then, of course, you have to look at, what are their customs regimes, their import rules, and so on, the product standards in these different markets that have to be met, intellectual property rights that have to be respected, and so on. And then all of that flows into the design of a contract. And contracts can be one-off transactions. You're just buying something from a foreign country or shipping it there. And very often they are also then repeated transactions. You have to look for financing opportunities. You will see and oversee a letter of credit transaction, maybe a bank guarantee, some other form of financing. Then they could turn into joint ventures. They could turn into long-term licensing agreements where you are becoming like a distributor for someone, and you have some exclusive rights, or you have an opportunity to license trademarks or patents of your client in different jurisdictions. And with all of these, you have to understand that each individual national legal system becomes almost irrelevant, right? When I study German law is not part of international business law. It's not used because how many people in the world are German lawyers, right? It's a fraction, a very small fraction. And the rest of the world, they don't want to use German law because they don't really, really understand it. They think it may be a good system, but then again, maybe not, right, for their purposes. And the same is true for every single country, right? Whether it's the United Kingdom or the United States, no single country is going to impose its legal system on the world of business and commerce and trade. So what you want to learn and study is not a national legal system. That's good to understand how are these people thinking that are sitting across the negotiating table. But what you want to understand is international business law. And international business law increasingly follows its own rules. For example, the United Nations Convention on the International Sale of Goods, the CISG, has been ratified now by about 80 countries around the world, and that has increasingly become the gold standard in international contracting, right? So you have, of course, some contracts are controlled by American law, some are controlled by English law. You've seen with recent cases, for example, the one that is still pending in Pakistan, the Tazai Corporation versus AM Construction, where the Lahore High Court, I think, delivered a decision on the recognition and enforcement of an arbitral award that was just wrong. And I'm looking forward to the Supreme Court to fix that, right, to overrule that and recognize and enforce the arbitral award. That case, the contract was based on Pakistani law. I don't understand why they did that, right? Somebody wasn't paying attention because Pakistani law is complicated. It's this mix of English law and Sharia, and even if you ask Pakistani lawyers, oftentimes they cannot give you very straightforward answers how the law would apply to a particular problem, and that means foreign lawyers are not going to want to do that. So learn to understand different legal systems, but then find out, what are the best legal systems or the best legal rules, even if they are disconnected from a national legal system, to apply to an international transaction. An American attorney will draft you a very long contract, right? The contract will have 100 pages and they'll charge you $50,000 for it, and they write their own contract law into it. A European, continental European thinking lawyer will just make a reference to the CISG and use that as the contractual. The smartest lawyer will combine them all, right? Will be picking a bit from here and there in order to put together a package that works perfectly for that particular client. So there's, maybe we can talk for a minute about blockchain before we go into arbitration. Yeah, the blockchain is a very interesting concept. For those of us who are not familiar, blockchain is a distributed ledger. It's basically saving information on so many computers that you can't hack it, because you would have to hack them all simultaneously, right? I think for the not so technically inclined, think of blockchain as your smartphone, right? It doesn't do anything, and you don't want to understand what it does. What really matters is the apps that you have on your phone, right? The different apps that make your phone suddenly useful. If you had no apps, you could just make phone calls. You don't need a smartphone. You could have a 1980s flip phone for that, right? But the apps make your phone really what it is, and they give you thousands and tens of thousands of opportunities, and that's how you have to think of blockchain. Blockchain is software, but it is corresponding in functionality to like a smartphone, and then it depends on what kind of apps are we grafting onto the blockchain, right? And there are companies working on contract transactions, basically monitoring and developing. For example, a company that I work with based in Switzerland, we are developing standardized contracts for standardized transactions on the blockchain. Basically, you'll have an app on your phone and you activate it, and you get a contract draft ready-made with explanations. Here are your options. This is what happens if you choose option A or B on this particular question. And you go through like an expert system. You say yes and no to a few questions, and then you click basically formulate, and you activate this, and it's locked in on the blockchain. Therefore, it's secure. Both sides get it in their own language. Those are transactional opportunities. The other thing where blockchain will play a role is dispute settlement. Keeping information confidential, sharing it with parties across the globe, but only with those people that you want to share it with, and not with those who are doing corporate espionage or working, out of some basement trying to blackmail you into hacking your computer and locking up your files and saying, unless you send me 2 Bitcoin or whatever, I'm going to destroy your files and so on. With blockchain, that's not going to happen. But the technology is complicated. The people who can program this stuff, they're not very many, right? So it's been slower than many people have been thinking, right? Including myself. I think IBM announced in 2018 that 2018 was going to be the year of blockchain, or 2019. Well, it's still not happening, and 2020 is going to be remembered as the year of COVID-19, the pandemic. It's also not going to be remembered as the year of where blockchain just suddenly hit that critical mass and the tipping point and became like the technology that everybody uses and wants. So yes, you want to understand it. If in particular, if you are doing a law that is related to technology, where you are doing cutting edge work, but don't think of it as a safe career path at this point in time. I'm going to start teaching a course, blockchain, online soon. I'm working with one of my students who is been active in this field for a while to develop that, but it's been going a bit more slowly than I had hoped and anticipated. Okay, now arbitration. So transactional lawyering, basically designing and drafting contracts and helping people find opportunities and so on. That's the one thing. But then once we have a good contract, the goal is that we will not need dispute settlement, right? The best contracts will basically resolve themselves. They will not need litigation or arbitration because they are designed in such a way that everybody gets what they want, and we don't have any major problems. And if we have problems, we can negotiate solutions. Solutions will be negotiated when the contracts are fair, when everybody sees when the parties are acting in good faith, right? So if the contract is balanced and everybody wants to achieve the right thing and constructively work together, and if both sides can really benefit from the contract, it's very rare that one side suddenly becomes stubborn and says, we will not accept a compromise here, we want it all, and we will fight till the end, basically, to realize our rights. But sometimes, issues become personal or they become existential, right? If a company gets into financial difficulties and they realize that, for example, their survival depends on not paying for something, right? Or not paying penalties for something that they did. And then they will use either arbitration or litigation to delay this. Or there's an old proverb for lawyers, right? If you go and litigate or arbitrate, you have to win, right? If you can't win, then you have to, then you have to negotiate, you have to settle. And then if you can't settle, you have to stall, right? And so there are people who will litigate for decades. And, in fact, a country like Pakistan is one of those examples. Now, if you litigate in Pakistan, you know that it's going to take a long time. I've had colleagues from Pakistan assure me that a good lawyer can block any case for 10 years in the courts in Pakistan, just with procedural motions and stuff like that. No? In business, that doesn't work, right? So that's why businesses are not fond of litigation. Right? There's very few countries in the world where litigation leads to quick and fair results in general. No? And so 90% of all countries will have problems there, because the judges are either not very qualified or the systems are just very slow. Maybe, if just too many opportunities of delaying, the costs can become enormous when, procedural motions are brought into play and they are slowing everything down and so on. Business wants predictability. Business needs to know what's going on, right? Because if I know what the future is going to bring, I can prepare for it. Even if I don't love the outcome, I can prepare for it, right? Whereas pending litigation is unpredictable. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what's going to come out of it. That's bad for business. I can't really prepare for that. And if I'm negotiating internationally, or if somebody is maybe trying to acquire my business or whatever, my client's business, and then they find out we have litigation pending, they will say, oh, you have that case pending, that's multi-million-dollar litigation. No, maybe not, right? Because I had that, it was an interesting example. You may have heard of the litigation that's going on here with some of the agricultural chemicals. There is a product that is now considered to be carcinogenic. That means it can cause cancer with farm workers and so on. And the company, an American company that developed it, they were acquired by Bayer, a German multinational, and they didn't do their due diligence, right? They bought the company and didn't realize that there's billions of dollars of product liability litigation basically building up, class actions in the United States courts where farm workers and other users of the product or even neighbors they say, well, my father, my mother, my aunt, my uncle, or whatever died of cancer, and we think that it was related to this. So, you buy a company for 10 billion and suddenly you have to throw in another 10 or 20 billion to settle all the litigation cases. That's not good. So companies put arbitration clauses in contracts because arbitration for them has multiple advantages. Number one, it's faster, right? I can get, even in complex arbitration, I can typically get a result between 9 and 15 months. If it takes a year and a half, then it's already quite long. So then I know what I have. I'm done with it. Second, it's confidential. Nobody knows. When I sign as an arbitrator to take on a case, they often require that I do not even say that I'm participating as an arbitrator in an arbitration with these companies. So not only the substance of the case is confidential, but even that there is a case in the first place, right? Because they don't want to scare their shareholders. They don't want to share or scare away people that they are trying to do deals with from this, oh yeah, you have litigation, is there a problem, right? Arbitration, confidential, nobody knows. Third advantage, you get to pick people who are knowledgeable in the industry, right? With a judge, even if the judge is very good, she is knowledgeable, she is not corrupt or anything and well educated, she is rarely an expert in a particular industry, right? A judge they have to do too many different things. They will not understand, in the detail how the international oil trade, for example, really works. They can look at the contract, they can look at the law, but do they know what is customary, how things are done, what certain terms really mean, how they are applied, maybe even a bit differently from how they sound or look like. Whereas if you have a problem, for example, that is related to oil and gas trade, you pick an arbitrator or you pick a tribunal of 3, and you pick people who have been in that industry and, arbitrating cases or advising companies for decades, right? They know the in and out of that. They know everything. And you get a result that is going to be reflecting really of the fair trade in that particular industry. So you choose the law, right? You choose the language. Think about it. If you're doing litigation, you have to take the language of the court. A court doesn't work in foreign languages. Witness statements will have to be interpreted simultaneously. Documents will have to be translated if they're not in the court language. It can cost a boatload of money to do that. Whereas in arbitration, you say, okay, we're going to do the arbitration in English or in Spanish or whatever suits the transaction, and then we'll pick arbitrators and we'll pick rules and so on who are fluent in that language. So you pick the procedural rules, you pick the substantive law, you pick the people who are knowledgeable in that. Now, from those of us who are listening today, the majority of you will probably not become arbitrators. Now, does that mean you shouldn't be interested in arbitration? Well, the majority of you are going to be advising the clients who are going to arbitration, right? And if you know how the arbitrators are thinking, and if you know the rules that apply in arbitration, that's how you deliver the high value services to your clients. And really there's a great opportunity here because think of it from the lawyer's perspective, right? If you want to practice or appear in front of a court, you have to be admitted to the bar. Right. So, for example, if you end up litigating a case in the United Kingdom, or you end up litigating in the United States, or maybe you have to go to a court in Switzerland, well, if you're not admitted to the bar, you're not going to be representing your client there. Right? You're gonna work with local co-counsel, which means they take the credit and the money, and you do the work. Good fun. Whereas if you do arbitration, none of that is required because you are going to be the lawyer. There is no bar admission, right? And the only thing that's going to get you through the door is your qualifications. And that's really fair and great opportunity for people, in particular from less developed countries, where you may not have so easy access to foreign courts. We have more questions, Imran. Do you want to?
So I'm going to go through some questions. So there was this question that was related to blockchain. It sounded a bit technical on blockchain and automation of contracts. How about the subjectivity element? How is the area tackled? And then I have 3 more questions that I'd
I'm
like.
not sure what is meant by subjectivity element.
Okay. So I'll let the
We can maybe come back to this later.
yeah, we can come back and they can explain their question. So we have this question. I think it goes back to your earlier discussion or insight that you provided us about the role of UK
Yeah,
declining
yeah.
within the European Union. So the student are interested in knowing that should they be, do you recommend US law over UK
Yeah,
law for the
yeah.
future?
Yeah, I think understanding how English law works is useful, but the application of English law is declining. There is no really UK law. I mean, they have the UK Sales Act, but Scotland has actually quite a different legal system from England. It's a civilian legal system, and there is actually a chance if the UK stays out of the EU, that Scotland will split and try to rejoin the EU, because they will realize that it's beneficial for them in the EU. And they voted against Brexit, right? And there's a significant majority in Scotland that wants to stay in the EU. But yeah, I mean, when we talk about, what legal systems to study, the European Union is a much more important actor than the United Kingdom, simply by size, right? You have 450 million versus 60 million. There's no question about who has the gravitas here. The economic impact is going to be on the continent. And the European Union, to understand the European Union, it's not so easy, because it's actually a very complex mechanism, bringing 27 member states together around the table, and they're not flexible towards the outside, right? Because important decisions in the European Union are done by consensus. So you need 27 countries to agree. This means when the United States, for example, negotiates with the European Union, and the US says we want it one way, the European Union, even the Commission, or maybe some of the member states, they may say, yeah, that's okay with us. But if only one member state says, no, I'm not okay with it, then it's not going to work like that. So the European Union is an animal to study that is very, very intricate and important to understand how it moves. And they have significant de facto power, because the European Union doesn't exist outside of law. It has no civil servants almost, right? It doesn't have a customs service. It doesn't have, police services or prison service or anything like that. The member states do that for the European Union, but the European Union sits at the top and makes the rules, right? They say, okay, here is how it's done. And then the member state branches are basically the executive powers of the European Union. And the European Union is in the lawmaking business like nobody else, right? So de facto, when you look now, who makes international environmental law? Right? What's the cutting edge there, right? Who regulates blockchain? Who regulates food safety? Right? Who does any of these kind of forward-looking regulatory drafting and so on? It is largely the European Union. And to some extent, it is the United States, because they're a big domestic market, and American lawyers don't study foreign law. You have tens of thousands of international lawyers coming to the US for LLMs, but you have only, dozens of American lawyers studying in other countries. They are very small numbers. So American lawyers do not regularly understand much about foreign legal systems. They are very self-contained, right? So they do their own thing, and simply because it's also a big and powerful player, they have an impact, right? So studying US law makes sense. The United Kingdom doesn't even know how to make law anymore. They have to relearn that, because they have been now from 73 to 2019, they were members, right? The regulatory work was done in Brussels with, of course, UK contributions, but they have to rebuild entire branches of the government where they didn't have the competence in these many years, right? So they will actually discover that de facto they are going to continue applying European Union law for years in many areas, until they figure out how to make, small changes to it that reflect British sovereignty, but only make it harder for British companies to do trade and all that. So those are many of these factors why I would personally, if you ask me now as a young, or my kids, I have 5 children at various ages, if somebody there was saying, okay, I want to study in our foreign legal system, I would not send them to the United Kingdom, simply because that's not one of those systems that currently is cutting edge. They have excellent schools, right? I mean, Oxford, Cambridge, London University, those are outstanding educational centers. And in some areas, for example, Queen Mary, I mean, they are excellent on intellectual property. They teach you international intellectual property. They don't teach you English intellectual property law, right? So if you're going to University College or King's College or, any one of those in London, you can get a good education, right? You can get an excellent LL.M. by picking those subjects that are international and comparative business and trade law. I would not study English law personally, right? Because I think it's declining in importance. No? Would I go to the United States? Yes. Would I go somewhere else? It depends, right? Where can you get a cutting edge education? There are universities. It depends also a bit where you want to be. For example, I have not done much work in Australia, New Zealand, in that part of the world, right? So for me, that's not a place I would go to. But I have colleagues and friends there, and if that's a part of the world where you want to be active, sure, right? They have also very good educational institutions. My part of the world has been largely, Europe and the United States, and then into the Middle East, into Asia, into some parts of Africa, a bit of Central and Latin America. So that's a bit sort of personally determined also. It also depends a bit where you want to work, right? To be honest, right?
So we have another student, Sumran Rajput, and she's from our YouTube channel, and she's saying, "Hello, Professor. I'm in my final year of LLB, University of London. Due to this pandemic, what would you suggest that people such as myself should do after getting our results? So after finishing their final year, so basically graduating in this August, September, when she graduates."
Yeah, I think that the labor market is going to get a little bit more difficult in the immediate future, right? Because I think it'll take us until the spring of 2021 to have a vaccine that has been safe and tested and is becoming widely available. And I think that's probably about as optimistic as we can be at this point in time. And until we have an effective vaccine, the pandemic isn't really going away. We're going to have to be, socially distancing and all that. And the messages we are getting now, for example, Cambridge University has already announced that they will have none of the larger classes in the next entire academic year. They'll do some of the tutoring and everything else is going to be online because of until they can be confident that they will not become a pandemic hotspot. You have to think of it. This the worst nightmare of a university administrator is that the name of the university is in the headlines as a pandemic place, right? So in the US, we had a lot of the liability issues. So my university, I think the instructions for the fall are 2 empty seats between each student, right? So you can imagine all the classrooms only 1/3 capacity, and that means also that the hiring, the business sector, they will be cautious, right? They will not know really when the full business is coming back. Many industries will change. I don't think that the airline industry, for example, is going to go back to normal anytime soon. Hospitality, tourism industries will be affected longer term. A lot of the supply chains will have to be rebuilt because, from certain countries, you just cannot source so easily anymore. That means the labor market will be more challenging, right? And I would recommend, if you're graduating now, and stick to your original plan, send out the applications and look for the internships, but be aware that you may not get the things you wanted. Being internships, they will say, well, maybe we don't do that this year. Hiring, they may be reduced and so on. Don't be frustrated. It's not about you. It's not that they don't appreciate you. It's not that you got the wrong degree. It's just a little bit the wrong time. Right? And that means do something else with your life, right? Do something that looks good on your resume. do an LL.M or do a gap year meaningfully. Build housing for poor people in Colombia or something like that. Something that you can put on your resume that people will say, yeah, okay, that works. You didn't just hang out at home basically crying over spilled milk. You made something of this. You turned a challenge into an opportunity. And I think that's really what people have to do now. You have to be a bit flexible, right? These kind of outside shocks to our systems, right? Like a pandemic. Nobody prepared for this. Nobody was ready for this. Nobody understood at the beginning, and we don't even really fully understand even now what it all means, right? And then some people, they will just dig in their heels. They will say, yeah, but I still want, to do my work like I'm used to. And if they don't get what they are used to, they're frustrated, maybe even becoming aggressive, right? You have domestic violence going up, people yelling at their family because change is coming, right? Those are the losers in these kind of times. Whereas if you can adjust, right? If you can respond flexibly and say, okay, I'm not going to make £100,000 in my first year out of law school now. I'm going to have to invest more into my career and my education, or I'll have to do something else. If you have a family, maybe you can start a small business or take care of family for a while, and do something, but try to do it in a way that you can really show it on a resume and it looks good, right? Be flexible, because those are the people who come out on top at the end of the day. Well, because the market's going to come back. The work is there. It needs to be done. The world is not going to end globalization because of this. We're not going to stop trading with China because Trump doesn't like them right now, right? We're going to just work on finding new solutions for the problems that haven't really changed.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of like a tradition I've seen in the US, whenever there is a recession, or whenever there are difficult times and people are out of work, or or cannot easily find work, like the recent graduates that are going to join the market. So then maybe it's a good time to further invest in your skills and education. So instead of spending, doing nothing at home, get enrolled into an LLM, or do a bar course, or write in some magazine, sorry, in law journals or newspapers, as per se. So I have this question from Ujala, and then Sir Usama Malik. So Usama Malik teaches public law with us. So I'm gonna share his question later, but first I want to go back to Ujala's question. She's saying, I was your student at Indiana University back in 2006, and one of the most interesting classes I attended was your lecture on EU competition law. I have been wondering, should competition law apply in these time of a global pandemic where the companies may have to collaborate for their best interest?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that's the strength of law and lawyers. We are problem solvers, and so if we have a problem, for example, that a couple of companies, they want to work on a vaccine, and you can easily imagine, if everyone does it on their own, it may take longer, right? If they can pool some resources, they may come to a result better that'll save potentially thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives. So yeah, we give them an exception. That doesn't mean that we don't apply competition law anymore, because the next thing is, if we suspend the application of competition law and you get one person, one company figuring out the vaccine, now they have the monopoly. Right? And now they're going to charge any price they want, because they say, we just invested millions into developing this, so now it's our time to eat. And they will sell this vaccine at, let's say, $1,000 a pound. And that means that none of the people in Africa, with the exception of a very, very, very small elite, and very few people in Southeast Asia and many other parts of the world, will have access to it. It's going to be a vaccine only for rich people. And that it'll be abuse of a dominant position, right? So you need competition law to make sure. I think we need competition law more than ever. If you look at the concentration process that's going on now, we hear about airlines filing for bankruptcy. So there will be fewer airlines flying in the future. Fewer airlines means less competition. They'll charge us more. we see Facebook, Google, and all these social media enterprises and so on dominating markets, for advertising, for information sharing. And if they can do whatever they want, then we will be at the mercy of these corporate entities, and they will be having a field day, presenting us their opinions at inflated prices, and that's not good for us, right? Competition law makes sure, and it's really, I have written a piece. You can, by the way, if anybody wants to look me up, just Google Frank Emmert research gate like the door, right? And you will find I have posted most of my publications, presentations, all free for downloading. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to be a member or anything. They may ask you to sign up, but it's free, and you don't have to share pictures or resumes or whatever. And you'll have access to thousands of researchers, and all the stuff is free on there, right? Because my goal is, that people see my arguments, my ideas, and engage with me. So I've written about, how and why to introduce competition law in countries, in particular in less developed countries. So you can look at details there, how it protects us from the collaboration of companies to the disadvantage of the clients and the consumers, or the domination of one large company, right? It's very, very important concepts there, but it doesn't mean that we can't intelligently adapt when we want them to work together on renewable energy, or, clean water, or, a vaccine for the virus.
So the other question is, I think it goes back to the nature of international law. And so the question basically from Sir Osama is that why is it called soft law? Is it because it lacks implementation mechanisms in certain cases, or because it is founded on the consent of states? So what do you think is your insight or input on that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a combination. So on the one hand, public international law does not have a lot of black letter law. Right, we have many conventions, but then if you look how many countries actually ratified them, it's not always a very large number. There's not that many conventions like the United Nations Charter, or the New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of International Arbitral Awards, Foreign Arbitral Awards. Those are conventions that are ratified by almost every country in the world, but there are not that many of those. So if you look at the volume of black letter law that you have in public international law, it's not that much. And if you combine that with the idea that customary law is one of the three sources of public international law, right? So the first source is conventions, the second source is customary law, and the third source is actually general principles of law. Neither of those are black letter law at all, right? They are just notions. They are just, you have to observe what are countries doing. Why are they doing certain things? Do they believe that they're bound to do it, or they believe it's just convenient? And if you find out that, yeah, they're doing it because they feel this is what we ought to do, this is what the rules are, then you have a customary rule. So that's the one side. So we don't have a lot of hard and fast black letter law. The second is, of course, the enforcement side. Right? You're absolutely right that there's a problem with enforcement of public international law. And somebody like Trump is not helping by ignoring all kinds of obligations, or making fake claims. For example, for non-respect of WTO law, he says it's national security. The automobile industry is threatened, and this is nonsense, right? No lawyer who is worth their credentials will endorse those kind of statements. This is politics, right? This is just an abuse of exceptions that were narrowly crafted in order to avoid obligations. And what the other countries then do is they retaliate in kind. China then imposes restrictions against the United States, and it escalates. Now he has announced that he doesn't want Chinese students and won't give visas to Chinese students anymore. This is like two children fighting in a sandbox, right? It gets ugly and it gets nasty and people get hurt, right? And it doesn't help the world going forward. It doesn't make America great or anyone else, right? It's just stupid. But it is what it is, and you don't have an international court where you can go to and litigate or enforce these kind of rules. Yes, we have the WTO dispute settlement body in Geneva, but their enforcement powers are limited. We have the International Court of Justice in The Hague. When Nicaragua took the United States to the International Court of Justice in the 1980s because the US had mined harbors in Nicaragua and armed the counter-revolutionaries, the judgment of the International Court of Justice was 3 parts, right? Number 1, you did something wrong, America, right? Number 2, don't do it again. And number 3, pay compensation. And every one of us knows exactly the dollar amount that Nicaragua received in compensation, right? This many, 0. And what are they going to do? Are they going to send their sheriff riding into Fort Knox and confiscating the gold? So yeah, and I must confess, public international law is a fascinating subject, but it frustrated me a little bit. I didn't feel that I could get the kind of satisfaction that I get from commercial law, because in commercial law we can enforce and we can make hard and fast law, black letter rules, right? Contracts follow the rule of pacta sunt servanda in international law, corporate contracts. And if you have a good arbitration clause, then in most cases you can enforce your contracts, right? So I find it more satisfying because my creativity doesn't get blocked by considerations of political expediency. I can not 100%, but in 90-something plus percent, we can really make it work in commercial law, right? Whereas in international diplomacy, public international, if all the countries work together in their best interest, then it's also very good. But if you have some disruptors like Trump or a couple of others, populists, Bolsonaro in Brazil, who doesn't respect anymore these climate protection agreements, doesn't mind it if the Amazon rainforest goes up in flames and so on. Erdogan in Turkey, populists around the world, they damage international law. They disrespect it, and international law is not very well suited to stopping that from happening.
I think I've asked almost all of the question, and you've provided your input on all of them, and it was very helpful. I do want to ask one last question, and that question kind of also ties up with the last comment that we have received. And the question is that if there is a graduate, either from LLB or from LL.M, and they are done with studying and they're ready to practice law, and they have this goal of becoming an international lawyer, what should be the first 2 or 3 things that they should be doing right after graduation that can later on help them becoming an international lawyer?
Yeah, I think I must say my own career has been largely in public universities, but I was dean of a private university law school for a while as well. So I've served on both sides, and of course, cost of education is always a concern for young people in particular, right, and families. But I tell you one thing, that's a consistent experience of mine: don't focus on the money. Because if you do the right thing, get the right education, the money comes back, right? What you have to focus and what you have to think of is the time. If you are in the wrong program, at the wrong place, studying the wrong subject, that time never comes back. You're wasting 3-4 years that are not going to get you a job, that are not going to get you the kind of work that you want or the kind of salary, right, that you need to support your family. That time doesn't come back, right? You're not going to start over and do a second LLB or LL.M somewhere else, right? That's really not a good use of your lifetime. So focus on getting into the kind of programs, in the kind of institutions, and in the kind of countries that'll really open those doors, right? And hey, if need be, maybe, work on the side. I also think that trying to finish as fast as possible is not always the best option, right? I think it takes time for these concepts and these structures to build in our brains, right? To internalize something, to become really good at it. I always find it sad when students come to me. In the United States, most students also study only 3 years in law school. So I have students coming to me sometime in the middle of their second year, and they say, yeah, I've done all the required courses now, and now I want to take something international. And how should I do that? And I say, okay, maybe start with public international law, and then do international business transaction, and then international arbitration, and then maybe a moot court. And then they will say, oh yeah, I actually don't have that much time and that many credits anymore. They just want one course. And I say, it's like, taking one semester of German, right? What are you going to learn? You're going to say hello and guten Morgen and danke schön, and that's it, right? You don't learn a language from one semester. You don't learn international law from one course. So you have to start and take your time, right? You have to digest that stuff, and you have to have the ability to take an internship, right? Maybe to participate in a moot court competition. So one semester, you're not really doing much else, You're doing the JESSIP or the VIS or another international moot court. That's what you're focusing on. So get into the right program, and then don't hurry through it as if somebody is chasing you. You'll have enough time to work after that, right? You have many, many years of hard labor coming your way, basically, right? So enjoy it also, and make sure that you figure out what you want, right? Because if you know what you want and you go in the right direction, you can save yourself detours that can cost a lot of time and money, right? So focus on getting the program that really, really works for you and that offers opportunities afterwards, because your mind will change, right? During your studies, you'll discover subjects that you didn't even know existed before, right? So you may go in there and you say, I want to be, working with the United Nations, let's say. And then you discover the rest of international law and you have completely new ideas. And, later somebody asks, so what happened? You didn't go to the UN. Oh yeah, I don't even, I don't even remember why I wanted that at the beginning. So you have to be open, right? Open-minded. And that means if you go very narrow and your education qualifies you only for one thing, maybe the market changes. Maybe there's just no jobs in that market, or maybe your preferences, your priorities, your interests are changing. Great opportunities in other fields that you're not prepared for. That doesn't work well. So pick something where you get the top quality education, right? Think more about the quality than about the money, and take something that gives you a wide range of opportunities so that you can pick the ones that the market needs and that you are enjoying and that you are passionate about. If you're passionate about something, you'll be good at it. If every morning you say, oh, I have to go and study this, I'm going to go to work again, you're not going to be good at it because you're not enjoying it. You're not in it with your heart, right? So try to find that place that really works for you, because then you will excel. And once you're really good at it, the money will come back, I promise you. You're not going to worry about, paying back your student loans and having a decent life for your family.
I think that is great advice, because when students come to us at Blackstone also, and they have all these ideas about what they want to be after they finish their LLB, we tell them that LLB is a very vast degree. It has a lot of flavor in it. So taste all the flavors and see what you like, and then, like you said, if you work through your passion, things become easy. They come naturally to you. You enjoy doing it, and the organization or the corporate or the government body you are working for, they also feel that that you are really invested into it, and they can see that, and that brings in more and more opportunity.
Absolutely. I would, life is too short to do something that you hate every day. Don't do that. If you end up in a job like that, change. Might do it while you still can, but preferably don't even get there, right? Do something. You're right. You're absolutely right, Imran, by saying at the beginning you may have to sample around a bit. Right? That's why a good law school that has a range of courses is big enough. That is not narrowly focused is very good. You taste a bit different subjects, figure out what you're really passionate about, and then prepare in that direction, but not even too narrowly. Right? Don't do only arbitration because Professor Emmert is an arbitrator, so that's what I want to do. You have to also, I do international investment law. I advise, of course, business transactions. I do international intellectual property law, sometimes even a bit of international tax law, because they all come together, right? And if there's not much business in one area, well, then I'll be ending up doing something else for a while, right? And I'm enjoying that, updating my knowledge and so on. So that has worked for me very well. And I would certainly be able to recommend taking a similar approach.
Thank you very much for your time today. I think it was very useful. We normally we don't have questions from so many countries. Maybe it was international law and a true talk on international law, because we had questions coming from Uganda, from India, from Pakistan, and from a lot of other countries as well. And so thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you. You can share my contact information if you want. People can write to me as well. There are things you can do as students. Create a portal on ResearchGate if you're already working for a student law journal or something. For example, my own Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in London, student membership is free. Right? Now think about it. If you say at your interview after you're done with your law degree, I'm interested in working international business, transactions and arbitration, and I've taken these classes. And by the way, I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Hey, the next candidate doesn't have that, right? So use these opportunities. Huh? There are many opportunities to go into international law. Don't be intimidated.
So I'll wait for your email. Please share your these useful links for. I think you shared them in your profile as well. We have already shared that in the Facebook post. So the viewers, they can find the links on the Facebook post or the YouTube channel and the YouTube post. And if there is any information missing, we'll add that as comments. So you can take advantage, and you can become member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitration, or if you want to reach out to Professor Emmert, and if you have a question about international law, if you are interested in joining the LL.M program at Indiana University with Professor Emmert at his center, you can reach out to him as well. Thank you again, and there's a lot of thanks coming from all of the from the students who are watching. And thank you again for your time. It was a pleasure hosting you and picking your mind.
For everyone who is interested getting in touch, I have an advantage. My name is not very common, right? So if you Google Frank Emmert, you'll find me.
Yeah. So that's it's very easy. So just write Professor Frank Emmert or Frank Emmert, FrankMemmert, and you'll find his details, and you can contact him. And so another thank you note coming from Sophie. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.